US President Joe Biden's Global Climate Summit. 40 world leaders are taking part in the US-led meeting. It's part of Washington's return to the front lines in the battle against the crisis. The US plans to lead by example by cutting emissions in half by the end of 2030. Simon Marks is in Washington, D.C. now. Simon, President Biden's plan, is it new and ambitious?
Well, it's a bit of both, isn't it, Dawn? I mean, this is a very important day for President Joe Biden, the day on which he signifies to America and the world that after 4 years of the Trump administration, in which climate change was barely even an afterthought here in Washington, D.C., now it is absolutely front and center in terms of the US government's approach, not just to international policy, but also to the domestic economy. President Biden and his team insisting throughout this climate change summit that this goal of reducing America's greenhouse gas emissions by between 50 and 52% of their 2005 levels in just 9 years' time by 2030 is not just about cleaning up the environment. They maintain this is all about creating American jobs and creating American jobs in a new area of to America's dependence on fossil fuels. But look, these goals that President Biden has unveiled here this morning are not binding. There's no legal agreement that requires the United States to meet them. They are absolutely going to require the enthusiastic cooperation of private business. And we've just had a very interesting statement from the US Chamber of Commerce to what the president has had to say. On the one hand, welcoming America's renewed focus on climate change, but on the other hand, warning achieving the president's goal while also supporting economic growth and job creation will require new technology and new policy that is durable and has the support of bipartisan members of Congress, consumers, business, and other stakeholders. That's kind of like finding a needle in a haystack in a highly polarized Washington, D.C., and the Chamber of Commerce clearly indicating that by the time 2030 rolls around, Joe Biden's gone. Who's going to be in charge by then?
Well, the devil's going to be in the details if we're going to see progress on this one. Simon, thank you very much for that. Simon Marks here in Washington, D.C. Now,
And for more, we're joined by climate change expert Alice Hill. Alice, you heard our correspondent Simon Marks there talking about the challenges that Biden faces. So what did you make of that with regards to how things have been going so far at the summit?
Well, there's no question this is an uphill climb, but the United States is back in a big way. Very proud the president was elected. This is in this first 100 days. Symbolic. It's on Earth. It's on 40 world leaders to talk about the crisis at hand, which will define all of our lives. So I would check the box that this is a success so far.
Alice, the US says it wants to halve emissions by 2030. That's Joe Biden's goal. How realistic is this, though?
Certainly ambitious, but we have seen some major change recently, particularly from the private sector, indicating that they now recognize that this will affect their bottom lines if we continue to heat up globally. So we're seeing many more join the fight, but Congress, as was pointed out, remains an obstacle. We are deeply polarized, and this should benefit action. Without it, it will be very difficult to achieve the president's ambition.
Beyond the US, Japan and Britain have said they will slash. Long-term promises enough?
Well, it's going to take a global effort. So it's wonderful to see the ambition, Britain coming forward with a very ambitious target, given that it's going to host this conference of parties in November, and other nations stepping up. So we have to just push forward and all have ambition for other countries to come forward. We don't know if it'll be enough, but if we don't act now, of course, we are signing a very death warrant, essentially, of the planet.
Alice, China is the world's second biggest polluter, but it's also done a lot with green investment, with sustainable finance. And what action do we need to see from Beijing here?
Well, we need to see movement of the timetable, so they're moved up closer to match what other nations are pledging 2050. And we also need greater transparency from them, how they will achieve transparency behind these promises, because otherwise it's just a promise. And then we need to see China move off coal. Coal is the most damaging of the carbon emissions that we have, or the greenhouse gas emissions. So we need to see China wean itself from coal and move into other clean energies. It has been making great dependent on coal.
Other big emerging economies like India and Brazil haven't committed yet. What will it take to get them on board? They are both sort of struggling to contain COVID-19 at the moment.
And that's been a challenge worldwide. The pandemic has made it very difficult for countries to focus on this. But the catastrophic risk of the pandemic has given us all a front row seat on how damaging climate change could be. For India and Brazil, I think that all nations should be thinking about how we can provide them greater aid, particularly for India, which has had little to do with this problem. For its people, that many of the Indians do not have electricity access yet. And so that will mean that there'll need to be concessions to help India have power, as well as Brazil has the rainforest, and it proposed a very poor way that the U.S. pay to prevent deforestation. We may need to look at these kinds of swaps in Brazil and India to get them to come along as well, because they do contribute to the emissions problem.